Once upon a time, in a faraway town, there lived a young lady named Tima. Tima's beauty was like the morning sun, bright and unmatched. Tima wasn't just beautiful, she was rich too. She dressed in the finest clothes, the kind that shimmered like gold in the sunlight. Her shoes sparkled, and her jewelry made the young girls in the town dream of being like her. When she walked, she moved like a queen, her head held high, her steps slow and graceful, as if the earth itself welcomed her feet. Tima loved to party. The sound of music, the clinking of glasses, and the chatter of people laughing filled her nights. But she wasn't the kind of girl anyone could just talk to. No, Teemah was like a rare diamond, out of reach for most people. Only a few had the privilege of being close to her, and even fewer knew who she truly was. She's so perfect, young girls would whisper to one another, watching her from afar. I wish I could be like Tima. Tima, however, wasn't like most people. She never listened to anyone's advice, not even her family's, not her father, or even her mother or siblings. Her pride was as high as the tallest mountain. She believed she was better than everyone else because of her beauty and wealth. But behind her beautiful smile and elegant clothes, there was a secret, a deep, dark secret that Tima hoped no one would ever uncover. And so, the town admired her, the girls envied her, and the men desired her. But little did they know, the story of Timah's life was just beginning, and the truth behind her riches was something no one could imagine. The pride of Teemah shone bright, but the shadow of her secrets loomed quietly, waiting to be revealed. One evening, Teemah went to a party, her favorite place to unwind. The music was loud, the lights were bright, and laughter filled the room. Teemah sat at her usual spot, sipping her drink, her eyes watching the crowd like a queen looking over her kingdom. From across the room, Femi saw her. He was tall, handsome, and known as one of the richest men in town. His eyes stayed on Tima, drawn to her beauty. He walked over to her table, his steps confident. Good evening, he said, smiling. May I sit with you? Tima glanced up, her face calm and unreadable. Then she smiled lightly and said, Sure. That night, they talked for hours. Femi made her laugh, and Tima, for the first time in a long while, felt completely at ease. They even danced, their steps in rhythm with the music. By the end of the night, Femi couldn't help but feel he'd found someone special. But little did he know, if he'd really known the type of person Tima was, he wouldn't have even let his eyes meet hers in the first place. In the days that followed, Femi and Tima spent more time together. He treated her like royalty, buying her expensive gifts and taking her to the best places. Tima enjoyed every moment, her life seeming even brighter with him in it. One day Femi knelt before her, holding a ring. Tima, he said, looking into her eyes, you are everything I've ever wanted. Please, be my wife. Timah's heart skipped a beat. She nodded, her voice soft. Yes, Femi, I will marry you. Their engagement became the biggest news in town. People talked about how perfect they looked together. But deep inside, Tima knew her secret was still there, waiting like a storm in the distance. For now, she smiled and enjoyed the moment, pretending her past didn't exist. Tima and Femi's marriage was like a beautiful story. Their house was filled with laughter, love, and happiness. Every morning, Femi would look at Tima and say, I'm the luckiest man alive. Tima, in her graceful way, would smile and say, and I'm lucky to have you too. They lived like royalty, always together, always happy. People in the town admired them. What a perfect couple, they would say. Femi loved Tima deeply, and she made sure their home was always warm and welcoming. But as time passed, something began to change. 3 years had gone by since their wedding, and there were no signs of children. Femi didn't think much of it at first. He was happy just having Tima by his side. But one evening, his mother came to visit. As they sat in the living room sipping tea, she leaned closer to Femi and whispered, "It's been 3 years, my son. Why hasn't Tima given you a child yet? A man like you needs children to carry on his name. Don't you think it's time to find out what's wrong?" Femi's smile faded. His mother's words stayed with him, heavy like a stone in his heart. That night, as he lay in bed beside Tima, he stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. He loved her deeply, but the question kept echoing in his mind. Why hasn't she gotten pregnant? The next morning, Femi decided it was time to take action. He called his friend Kachi, who was a doctor, and asked for his help. Femi didn't know it yet, but the answer he was looking for would change everything. Femi couldn't stop thinking about his mother's words. He loved Tima, but the question of why they had no children kept bothering him. So he called his friend Kachi, a trusted doctor, to help. One afternoon, Kachi arrived at their house carrying his medical tools. "Let's check everything," Kachi said, with a reassuring smile. Femi nodded, feeling both nervous and hopeful. Tima sat quietly, her face calm, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. As Kachi prepared to begin, he noticed Tima's uneasiness. Her breathing grew faster, and her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "Tima, are you okay?" Kachi asked gently. Suddenly, Tima broke down. Tears poured down her face as she started shaking. I don't have a womb," she cried out, her voice breaking like a fragile glass. Femi froze, his heart pounding. "What are you saying, Tima?" he asked, his voice filled with shock and confusion. Through her sobs, Tima began to explain. "I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you," she said, wiping her tears. "Tell me what?" Femi asked again, his hands clenched tightly. Tima looked at him, her face pale. "I made a mistake when I was younger, a mistake that cost me everything," she said. Her voice was heavy with regret. Femi stared at her, trying to understand what she meant. Kachi stood silently, unsure of what to say. And then slowly, Tima began to tell her story, the secret she had kept buried for so long. Through her tears, Tima began to speak, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "When I was a teenager, my family didn't have much. We barely had enough to eat, and I was always jealous of my friends. They wore beautiful clothes and lived in big houses. But me? I only had what my parents could afford, old dresses and slippers that were falling apart." She paused, wiping her tears, then continued. "When I was 17, my father died. It was like the ground disappeared under us. My mother tried her best, but it wasn't enough. I hated being poor. I hated feeling like nothing. One day my friends Nana and Oyin told me about a man who was looking for a housemaid. They said the pay was so high, it sounded unbelievable. I thought, this is my chance. I didn't even think twice. I said yes." Tima's voice dropped lower, her shame clear in every word. "But when I got to the man's house, I realized it wasn't what I thought. He didn't want a maid. He wanted someone to satisfy his dog." Femi's face turned pale. "A dog?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tima nodded, her eyes full of regret. "I was terrified, but when he showed me the money, I forgot my fear. It was so much, more than I had ever seen in my life. So I agreed." The room fell silent, heavy with shock. Femi stared at her, unable to speak. Tima continued, her voice breaking. It wasn't just once. He paid me every week. And then, one day he told me he'd double my pay if I worked with more dogs. I agreed again. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted the money. She paused, her hands trembling. In a few months, I had more money than I ever dreamed of. But I never thought about the cost. I never thought about what it would do to me. Tima's words hung in the air like a dark cloud, filling the room with sorrow and disbelief. Femi stared at her, his heart pounding, as her terrible secret unfolded before him. Teemah continued working for the man. Every week, the money piled up. She wore the finest clothes, her jewelry sparkled like the morning sun, and her lifestyle was envied by everyone. She thought she had found the perfect way out of poverty, but the price she paid for her wealth was heavier than she realized. The man brought in more dogs, promising her even more money. Tima accepted every offer, blind to the dangers. Her pockets were full, but her heart grew emptier with every passing day. She never allowed herself to think about what she was doing. She just focused on the money. One day everything changed. Tima fell terribly ill. Her body felt weak. Her stomach throbbed with unbearable pain, and her skin was pale. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctor ran tests and delivered the news with a heavy voice. "You have a severe infection in your womb," he said. "If we don't remove it, you won't survive." Tima's world crumbled. "My womb," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The doctor nodded. "It's the only way to save your life." Faced with death, Tima had no choice. She signed the papers and the surgery was done. When she woke up, her womb was gone. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. "You'll never have children." Tima left the hospital, alive but broken. She couldn't return to the man who had paid her, so she found a new path. She became a sex worker, using her beauty to make even more money. Her wealth grew, but her shame grew with it. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who had lost herself. Deep inside, Tima felt empty. No amount of money, no fancy clothes, no glittering jewelry could fill the hole in her heart. She carried her pain like a heavy sack on her back, knowing that her choices had cost her more than she ever imagined. Her wealth sparkled like gold, but in her eyes, it was nothing more than dust. Back in the present, Timah's story hung in the air, her words filling the room like a heavy storm. Tears streamed down her face, her sobs shaking her body. "Femi, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't want to lose you. I love you so much." Femi sat frozen, his mind racing. The woman he had loved, trusted, and dreamed of building a future with had kept such a dark secret. His heart felt like it was breaking, but his anger burned hotter. "You lied to me, Teemah," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. "You let me marry you, knowing all this? How could you?" Teemah fell to her knees, her hands clasped together. "Femi, I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. Please forgive me." But Femi couldn't listen. The betrayal he felt was too much. In a fit of rage, he grabbed the flower vase on the table and threw it across the room. It shattered into pieces, just like the love he once had for her. "Get out of my house," he said coldly, his voice low but firm. "I don't ever want to see you again." Timah's tears flowed harder as she packed her bags. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. As she walked out of the house, the memories of her life with Femi played in her mind. His smile, his kindness, his love. Now, all of it was gone. Femi, still seething with anger, called Kachi. "Take me to the hospital," he demanded. "I need to know if I'm safe." At the hospital, Kachi ran tests and assured him, Femi, you're fine. There's nothing to worry about. But Femi couldn't shake the feeling of disgust. He felt unclean, ashamed, and furious. Back at home, he sat alone, his head in his hands. The house, once filled with love and laughter, now felt empty and cold. Femi couldn't decide what hurt more, Tima's lies or the love he had lost. Teemah walked away from Femi's house, her heart heavy with regret. The weight of her past felt like a chain dragging her down with every step. Alone and broken, she sat in the quiet of her empty home and stared at all the riches around her, the expensive clothes, the sparkling jewelry, the fine furniture. None of it brought her happiness. She thought about the choices she had made, the greed that had driven her to do the unthinkable, the lies she told, the love she lost. Her tears flowed freely as she whispered to herself, What have I done? One morning, Tima made a decision. She gathered all her wealth and donated it to an orphanage in the town. Use this money to help the children, she told the orphanage caretaker. Make their lives better. The town was shocked when they heard what Tima had done. Why would she give away everything? People whispered. But Tima didn't care about the rumors. She had made up her mind to start over. From that day on, Tima vowed to live an honest life. She worked hard, taking small jobs to earn her daily bread. Her life was simple now, but her heart felt lighter. She knew she could never undo the mistakes of her past, but she hoped her story would stop others from making the same ones. Her tale spread through the town like wildfire. Young girls who once envied her beauty and wealth now saw her as a warning. Tima's riches came at a great cost. Mothers told their daughters, Don't chase wealth at the expense of your soul. Teemah spent the rest of her life trying to make amends. She helped the poor, cared for the sick, and shared her story with anyone willing to listen. Though she could never have children of her own, she found joy in helping others. Her life became a lesson for all, a reminder that greed and vanity can destroy even the brightest of lives. And though she could never reclaim the happiness she lost, Tima found peace in knowing she had tried to do what was right in the end. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.